So we're gonna go ahead and call the Public Works Committee meeting to order. And our first order of business is to follow-up discussion regarding solid waste material collections at the collection and recycling centers for solid waste fees.
Okay,
Take it away.
take it away.
All right, so if you remember, in our previous meeting, we kind of came to, some issues with large and bulky material collection at the centers. Talked about how much we get and, how it's coming in, and it's kind of hard to keep up at a lot of the busier centers to keep up with the sort of the demand coming in to get it back out of there and get it to its proper disposal location. Essentially, it was more of just a discussion how we're going to get through that. Kind of got the idea that there wasn't a lot of appetite for, discontinuing that service to the residents. So what we've been doing and what we're kind of proposing and doing is we're pretty much staying the course with the large and bulky collections at the centers. With the thought that we do still have these load limits in place, which is equal to a pickup truck bed or equivalent load at a time. And knowing that some of these busier centers are going to get full. And when they do become full, we temporarily suspend collection of that material until we can get it out. And where that happens, it's mostly on Saturdays. It's starting to happen during the week a little bit, towards the end of the day. It's happening at the busier centers, Baxter, Fort Mill East, Mount Gallant, Stephen, help me out, 2 or 3 more, Leslie and Porter Road. So it's working now, where we still continue to collect the material. Puts a little burden on our attendants who have to kind of have those conversations with these residents that, hey, our boxes are full, we can't take any more today. You have to go to the landfill or come back another day. We've been doing that, and what we're doing now is tracking this data through the year. Our plan is to track this more. We weren't tracking those days before, but we're tracking that. We plan on tracking that for the rest of this fiscal year, and kind of potentially come back with recommendations next year.
And that data includes how much in weight we're getting, volume,
Yeah, we will have all, well, not
not the volume.
Well, the weights are gonna vary because it depends on the materials that go in.
Yeah, because the cube, it's just the
Right.
size is kind of the issue.
Yeah, it's 40-yard containers, and a couch may or may not weigh a certain amount, depends on if
Yeah.
they're sectionals or.
But you'll also track the closures, temporary closures. That's
Yes.
how often
We're doing that.
Yeah, so we'll have some data to come back to you all later on if we think there's
Yeah.
follow-up action required.
Okay.
And just, no additional resources were really allocated or budgeted for in this next fiscal year budget related to this. We're kind of stay in the course, see what we can do with what we got, with our current staff and equipment, and see what happens from there.
All right.
So the only thing the general public may notice is that they may show up at a place and may be full.
We can't take it.
We can't take it.
Right, okay.
But the staff will be able to provide options to them.
All right. Well, the next item is the recommendation to amend the ordinance regarding enforcement of litter violation and the addition of litter control officers in public works.
So I think in front of you, you have a draft ordinance that you should have. And we put this together. I'll let Eric get in a little bit more detail. It has been, we have discussed this with county attorney. He's reviewed it. I think for the most part, he's okay with it. The only issue is and all these enforcements, he has to make sure that's in accordance with state law. He said that could all be, he could make his updates after the committee meeting. If the committee wants to move forward with the ordinance, they can still report it out and he can make the updates. That being said, I'll let staff kind of walk you through, either Eric or whoever you'd like to walk through it.
Yeah, essentially the only changes, so there's an existing code enforcement ordinance. So they kind of made some revisions to that, proposed revisions to that to add a litter control officer. As it's being written and revised right now, this litter control officers, similar to code enforcement officers or like your animal control officers, they're not sheriff's deputies. They cannot pull over, somebody going down there. They can't make a, blue light pull over and pull someone over. Be limited to, unsecured load violations or, improper disposal at the centers or at the landfill, where they would essentially write an ordinance summons. And that's what this would be. So they would be enforcing the ordinance, as we write it at these centers. Or then that ordinance summons, it could start with a warning, just like we do in, if that's what we want, the approach we want to take is an educational approach. Start with a warning, and then we could have penalties going up from there. It would go to magistrate court. If they receive a ticket, it's got to go to court. They've got to have their time. So it's similar to a code enforcement officer. I know there was thought, we talked about it the last time, it was kind of a quick discussion where it was like, hey, can we use video to write tickets? And that really didn't come up as an option. This isn't similar to a parking violation. The violation is on the person and not the vehicle. So you can't just, look at a video surveillance and say, hey, that load came in unsecured, let's send him a ticket.
Right.
So it's kind of limited from what we talked about before. And that's
But it's a step up from what we have right now.
step up from what we have. Like I said, enforcement of litter historically has only been within either the municipality, law enforcement, or sheriff's office. We have never done enforcement. So this would be kind of a step up, one step up, but I don't know if it meets the expectations of what you were thinking as well, too.
The first thing I see in here, so we're stepping up I see $470. What is that for?
So
Is
that's
that the penalty?
So, I
No.
think the penalties, and that's still what,
That's still what
the attorney is still yet to happen. I
Now,
don't know if we could have this progression of fees. I don't know if that's a question. That's,
That 470, if I'm not mistaken, is based
That's a
on,
state.
that's the state law. So at the minimum, I think, or maximum fine is 470 or no more than 30 days in jail.
Now, they will only be enforcing this either at the landfill coming in or at the convenience centers.
correct.
That's the only jurisdiction they have
That's
there
the
to
way I
enforce.
understand
It'd
it.
be, any county property.
Any county property, yes.
Next thing, as the people are coming to the convenience centers or the landfill, are we going to be able to make the public aware that this is
Yeah, they were
going in
Definitely.
effect?
Our intent through this whole thing is to stop litter,
Right.
not to penalize and collect fines. That was the case when we put in the fees that we put into landfill. We don't want to collect the 20. That's more of an administrative burden on us. The intent is to stop it. So yeah, there'd be we move forward. We'll ensure a big educational push and campaign. On top of that, we talked about doing the warnings. We would set that for X amount of time. And yeah, that would be the big push is educational. So this officer would be an educational officer.
But the
too.
enforcement would be only limited by the officer. In other words, this convenience center staff themselves wouldn't necessarily,
Right.
wouldn't be able to write these tickets.
But I wasn't joking about what I said because they're a hot-headed people.
now, I made a little note. So we're gonna have to hire an additional staff person to do this?
That was the intent, yes.
Okay, that's probably gonna be a tough sell.
Right. It was in the budget submission, it was zeroed out, so we would have to come back.
Go back,
and
okay.
add that in.
Yeah.
Currently, it's not in the proposed
It's not in
budget
the,
right
it's
now,
not in
as
the
it's
budget
written
of
now.
any
Okay.
council right now.
Yes.
And second, I would like to see some kind of progressive scale, not, first offense, second offense, and then at some point, if that person reaches that level, they're at the max level from then on out. Whatever y'all wanna.
So a progressive,
Yeah,
yeah.
And I had that in my notes from the first time, and I believe, so that's the missing piece so far from the county attorney is
And
that
how long,
part.
and how long
So-
that progressive, is that a year, covers year period, and that kind of thing?
I'll look for y'all to.
Once in a lifetime, I don't know. Second offense.
You know, I guess get Michael Kendra to kind of weigh in as to how long before that person goes back down with
Right.
3 years, 4 years, whatever he suggests that,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear some
I think
options on it.
Yeah, I agree, and I think, you know, he was saying it needs to be consistent with state laws. So
Okay.
That's one of the things we're looking at.
I mean, we looked at some of those progressive scales. Generally started with a warning and then it went to like $50, and then 300 or 400 the max or something like that. But I don't know about time in between. You gotta also think if we were to have one litter enforcement officer for the whole county, you know, you're probably not gonna see that person again. I mean, I don't know. I'd probably have a long time in between.
Yeah,
That would be my
right.
first thought. Like, it doesn't start over after 30 days or
Right.
anything like that. Like, you got your one warning. Could be-
Now, I wanna ask you something else now, as far as the county and their trucks. Because me and you both know I work on independent roll-offs and everything else. And stuff gets stuck in the bottom of those roll-offs. And then they going down the road and the wind whoops and it's out of the truck. On the county stuff itself, what enforcement are they going to do as far as?
We're subject to the same enforcement everybody
Right.
else is, and
As
we've
an,
been.
as an individual, even as
Right.
an employee, they'd still be subject to that.
Cause I'm sure you got some that don't roll the tarps down, and me and you both know that tarps flap and junk comes out from under them and.
But this is only gonna be at the landfill, not on the highway.
Right.
We're not,
We have-
we're not gonna have.
We have
anybody stop.
procedures in place that all loads are supposed to be tarped on self-contained containers, what we call diapers, which are the tarps on the back stay
Yeah.
on. Whether they're full or they're empty. They're supposed to clean out their tires and everything like that. They're responsible for anything that comes out of that box or off of that truck in transit.
So what you're saying is there's a county policy in effect for county, there's a policy in effect for county employees that follow it. So that would be a violation of policy as well.
County policy, yeah, that would fall back on that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'll give you a good example. I was working on a piece of equipment one day and this was the city of York's truck. And they come in, picked it up and just laid it all up, driver never got out and looked nothing. And he took off and jokes just blowing off at the top of it where it didn't even go in, you know. So-
Educational period. What's thought process on how long should this be before we write any citations or ordinance violation?
Well,
6
first of
months,
all, I'd
9
say
months?
everybody who's subject to that first warning too.
Well,
In terms of a violation, but then an educational period, I think a couple months.
Release.
Yeah, depends on
3,
how much
6.
we can get it out there. I mean, we do social media, some press releases, some, probably some literature, some handouts that'd be a good one for our staff.
You're talking about
to
just
get
like
them out there.
notice ahead of actual.
Right, how do we get
ordinance
this out to the general public? Hey, you're coming here, these are the new rules.
Yeah,
We-
I think we could leverage Greg, of course, to help get the message out.
Yeah.
Maybe do a video or something like that we could use, that'd be part of it.
We had a situation,
Yeah.
I think we put this in what, like maybe 2018, one of the new ordinances or something, and the guy hadn't visited the landfill since then, and he comes in with an unsecured load, he gets a ticket. And this was like last year, wasn't it? But this has been in effect for several years.
Yes.
He just happened to come to the landfill. So we're not gonna reach everybody, everybody's not gonna know. You're gonna have those once every blue moon users that don't know who comes, and it's probably gonna land after the educational period. This guy gets a $25 ticket and he tore me a new one. I turned him over to Eric so he can get him one torn too. He got his torn.
More often than you think on that, too,
Yes.
because we get calls too constantly about the $25 fine.
Well-
And we've had some people who just turn around and leave.
I mean, we have
But
that
it's-
too. We use that as a teaching opportunity with that too. I mean, that is,
Right.
I get their concerns sometimes, I'm like, oh, and a lot, some of them, believe it or not, have been through there, and we can go back and prove that.
Right.
We've received it before.
Well,
This isn't something new though.
Right.
We
We're
do
just upping
tarp
it.
distribution
Yeah.
every year. They have tarps and bungees, and we hand out flyers and do that. But this state law has been in effect for a long time. So it's not something new the way it's written right now by the state law. This is,
But it's something new that we're gonna be kind of shining that light
It's
on
new
and
that we
really
be
hammer.
enforcing it
Yeah.
at the centers, yeah, rather than just, you know, law enforcement enforcing it on the roads.
but the key with the warning would be, the warning is the
Yeah.
educational piece, is the opportunity
yeah.
to.
For those-
Because I mean,
Yeah.
you got the justification of what one person thinks is a secure load and what the next person
Yeah, there's that too. There's a
thinks
lot of education.
that isn't.
Yes.
You know, well, I ain't got one bag of garbage stowed in the back of the truck.
All right, so, wanna hear something about the educational period and the tiered progressive fine, yeah,
Educational period and progressive fines.
yeah. So our next item is, updating fines on poundage allowed at the landfill. So,
So if you notice, there was, you had first reading of, ordinance revisions for tipping fees at the landfill.
And we talked about this.
Yeah, we talked about this in our first one, where one of our plans was, we've got, we're proposing a change from, currently residents get 2,000 pounds per month free at the landfill. Now, the landfill is an enterprise fund, proprietary, so, this is a service offered to the residents coming in there. But what's happening, we're getting a lot of commercial, entities, they're, you know, abusing it, so to speak. Coming in, they're using their 2,000 pounds a month, they come in, obviously tell their contractors, and then just, they're getting their 1 ton a month free every time and moving on. Well, the average person, like, really doesn't have to take 2,000 pounds of material a year. You're still allowed to take, we're still collecting large and bulky materials with limits at the centers. So this would be like
But that-
one-off things if you.
But that wouldn't
want
count
some-
against your annual limit either, because that
Right.
has to get waived.
Yeah, none of that, you can still bring what you're allowed to bring to the centers, this
This
is
is
just
only the
only to the
landfill.
landfill. So what we're at, is we're proposing change, we don't wanna take that completely away from the residents. So we said 2,000 pounds a year is probably more adequate than 2,000 pounds a month. I mean,
Right.
you're allowing, that's 12 tons a year. What average resident needs to get rid of 12 tons a year?
Other than perhaps
Right.
businesses or contractors who are not paying what we would consider to be,
tippet fees.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the recommendation to take that down to?
Take it to 2,000 pounds a year versus a month.
Okay,
And we have the ability to do that, and that, the ordinance as it is now and going to second reading right now, but can be amended, on June 5th is written that way. The 2,000 pounds a year versus 2,000 pounds a month.
okay.
Another thing other than the tipping fees, and I'll get to that too, that's in there is, well, say it, so the tipping fees, obviously, we're proposing, an increase in MSW, an increase in C&D, and an increase in land clearing debris tipping fees. So MSW will go from $43 to $46 a ton. I'll just start with that. We did an analysis of all local, options to dispose of that. We are still pretty significantly under the average. The average is 5205.
Okay.
And we're looking at Republic, Lancaster County, Cherokee County, Chester County, Fossil, and Charlotte, just to kind of, you know, if we raise this up, we don't want to also lose some of our customers because they're going to end up, but we're still significantly under, and this will help us meet our capital needs and some inflation that we've experienced.
And that's about a 7% increase, if you do the math.
Can we get some kind of, short slide, short presentation to at least put this out on the board at the meeting?
For third reading, can we do that? Is that
I think would that be,
or is that just?
Is third reading Monday?
I
No,
think it's-
third
No.
reading would be the
Before-
20th.
So
Yeah, I
before
think
we,
this is second reading on Monday, right?
so before we do the final reading, I'd like to have that displayed to show kind of, this is where we'll be
Well,
with the increase.
and I think, does that be the public hearing on the third? I'm just
Yeah,
thinking.
the public hearing will be the third.
So
Now-
We could do that as, we could either do that before or during that item.
Put it in new business.
Yeah, we'll just
instead
put
of
it in new
consent.
business, yeah. And we'll
Okay.
be able to, you can call in staff, and we can come up and present.
Right.
Now, on stumping yard waste and junk like that, are y'all still grinding?
So we're grinding and then hauling it out. Well, yeah, so we are. And that's costly,
Yeah.
obviously. Transportation costs has driven that up over the years. So we are going up on that fee as well, because right now, we're currently at 34, we're going to 36 with that.
I know it's costly, I just put a set of bearings in a tub grinder, $1,200 a piece.
And then also C&D, we were proposing from 38, C&D is construction and demolition list. We're proposing 38 to 40. And again, the average in the area is 45. So we're still under that. The only other C&D option really in York County is Coldthorpe. He's currently charging 60. But those that go there, I mean, if you're in the 4 Mill area, you're going there, right, as opposed to driving to York.
I'm talking about Barfield's thing.
Well, Barfield just has land clearing debris, basically your stumps and all that, so, yeah. But he's another option.
And then one item that had come up, I think in the last meeting, is you wanna just hit on the clean material.
Yes, so what currently in the ordinance, and this came about, I don't know, so many years back, for clean block, brick, asphalt, concrete, for clean, there's a provision in our current ordinance that says clean block, brick, and asphalt was a reduced fee. Now, the fee escapes me right now, I think it was 32, as opposed to the going C&D rate, which is 38 right now. That was when we would bring someone in and they would grind that, and then we would use it on site, so it had a benefit to us. We no longer use that material, it's no longer usable, it's very costly to have that ground up. So, doing the cost benefit analysis, we no longer even grind it, we now put that straight into C&D. So we're proposing removing that provision for a
So that-
reduced fee for clean block, because we're not using it anymore.
So that would no longer be, you can pay the full.
They will pay the
You pay the
$38,
full.
or I mean the $40 now as a C&D, because that's where it's going.
Okay.
There's no benefit to the county.
Right.
So we were removing that reduction.
Yes,
to
that's
reduce
right,
costs.
removing the provision of
Okay.
reduction.
Yeah, a lot of the private ones that do it are quitting too.
Yeah, it seems like
You
everyone
can't, you
now.
can't afford the equipment.
Right. And what we
Expensive.
did, a lot of the private ones were in a different situation because they were, they had their friends and they were doing it themselves and they were getting really clean stuff. We were not getting the clean stuff. I mean, everything we get is dirty and it was turning out to be a nightmare. Even when we used it on the roads, there'd be rebar in it and everything else, so it's just,
This flat tire city, I know, yeah.
so it's more cost effective for us to buy stone than it is to grind stone and reuse it. So,
But it's a shame though that there couldn't be a use found for fill or something somewhere other than the landfill.
well, coincidentally, we're using some of the bigger pieces right now to fill an area that we need filled. I mean, just to give you that. But yeah, we would encourage people not to bring block and asphalt. I mean, I don't like dealing with it. You put that in our C&D and hit it with a compactor, you're gonna feel that. Nobody likes that. So if people have the opportunity to send it to fill somewhere, have at it.
All right.
So third reading, Mark will have a slide to put up to talk to those three increases as well as the 2,000 pound change, if that's meets the
Yep.
need.
All right, and the last item we have is an update on additional scales at the landfill entrance to allow commercial vehicles to enter with a barcode reader.
So that came up when we were talking about, large and bulky material and the fact that we were potentially gonna take it away from the centers and everyone had to go to landfill. So that would have been a consequence, where we would have increased lines, increased wait times with everyone going to the landfill. Because we are kind of backing
Backing
off
off.
the large and
Mhm.
bulky,
And we're
we,
collecting data, yeah.
this is a good idea. This is an idea that's on our back burner right now, but we do have two large, capital projects in this next fiscal year at the landfill. We're finishing up the C&D landfill expansion, and then we're gonna redo the concrete floor at the transfer station. So we kind of put this back on the priority. It's definitely doable, but it's not a priority right now. We don't have long wait times, unless the scale goes down or something out of our control, but it is a good idea to think about in the future, and definitely get those commercial people coming through, and we can do it, so.
Well, I know Raleigh and a lot of other places have done it. And,
Right.
And that's why I brought it up, and I talked to some of my trucking buddies at Hall, and they said that it made a tremendous difference.
It would, we still have a lot of cash customers, where a lot of these private places, they just have commercial customers, and they don't even accept cash, so they don't even have to staff it at all, they could just let them all come in on that barcode system and bill them. But, it's definitely, it would even help us out too, we're subject to the scales coming in too, so. It's definitely doable.
But it's not
Just-
anything pressing right now,
Yeah,
because
we
we're
did-
still
I
continuing
mean,
to take the
We did not
bulk.
budget for it in this year, but we did look into the feasibility of it
Well-
actually happening.
I know that you're noticing here in the past year how much congestion y'all get in front of y'all on the main road out
At the
there.
landfill.
Yeah.
Highway
It's
5.
coming up.
Near the intersection.
Yeah,
Yeah,
every day when I leave work,
Right.
I can attest to that.
yeah.
So, yes, definitely.
Is that often, or
I mean, that's
just at
just,
certain
that's
parts
just
of the day?
general traffic
Every-
on Highway 5.
But they'd be backed up to the lighted park place sometimes, and the idiots, there won't be nobody in the left turn lane.
Oh, I thought
That's
you-
not related to the land.
Oh, I thought you were talking about coming to get in the
But
land. I was like, whoa.
no, but what I'm saying, no, eventually, it can become a problem, because you
Yeah.
know, traffic has from the landfill been
Yeah,
backed
yeah,
up
we've
before
had
out in the
scales
five.
go down, or,
Right.
Yeah.
weird situations, and this happens way
But
often.
my reason I brought that up was, is if it did nothing else, but got the big trucks on out of the way, then you regular folks, they could sit in the line over there near the scale house and go on, what I'm saying.
If we ever come into a really big bind with that, in the interim, before we put this in, we do have another set of scales down at the transfer station. We always have that ability where we can do some sort of temporary diversion just to get out of that bind. And that's what we do with our trucks.
Yeah.
So when it backs up like that, we'll ask our trucks to all come to the back, and they go to the scale and look and write their own weights down. So we can do that, so we have a backup plan until we can put this into place.
All right. Well, if y'all have any other suggestions to kind of help, any of these
I'd like to
topics?
go back to the, code enforcement officer.
Okay.
So just to get it straight in my head, so we're talking about one person for all,
I think initially that's what we're talking, yes.
how's that gonna work? I'm just curious, like,
It would start with an educational campaign where we would get the word out as much as we could from videos and social media and press
Right.
releases and things like that. But then we actually have to keep it in place where they would see this individual when they visit the centers here and there. It's still one
just here and
person
there, he's
to
just
start
gonna
out.
go,
We're gonna do it as one of them hide the ball face, ain't that right, Buck?
Hide the what?
Hide the ball face.
It is almost like a random inspection type, it's hit or miss whether you'll
Yeah.
be the one that, but
And-
it would be part of the educational campaign, I would think,
Okay.
initially.
And you need to go find the Undertaker, cause he needs to be about 6'7", 325 pounds.
There is that.
But-
So they'll just say, oh,
Okay.
okay, so my
I think
thinking,
part of that person's job would also be going to the magistrate, which is what we find with, animal control, is then when these cases come up, they have to appear in court.
So there's that aspect too, if they write a ticket, they have to go to
They
have to go to
court,
follow
present,
through.
right.
Yeah,
And so there's
okay.
a balance in terms of their time enforcing versus,
So, you're one person that's gonna have a lot to do. Do you think that that is going to be, like, really get be effective, I guess is what I'm trying to say. One person be effective for, like, how long would you say? 6 months, try to do one for 6 months or a year, and then, if that's helping the situation, then you're gonna up your staff?
That was my initial thought, because I don't think one person could continually do this. And
Right.
the one person was almost like a guinea pig. Kind of, let's see how this works.
Yeah,
See what we can get done and see what works and what doesn't. And then, yeah, I mean, full transparency, we'd probably be, for it to be effective, we'd be asking for additional.
And then
At a later
to
date.
get to, can we write enough tickets, penalties, and to pay, to offset the cost of the new person, right? And then, is it-
We still gonna have trash.
I don't think that can happen.
I was all excited, and then you said one person, I'm like, uh-oh.
I know how
That's a
difficult one
problem.
person would be to sell adding a new staff, but.
Yeah, but I
This
understand
is-
what you're saying, it's kinda like just an experiment, I guess, you're looking at looking
similar
at
to
it.
the landfill, we made that change, and it took almost 5-7 years later for people to actually kind of catch on and get it, and now, I wouldn't say a majority, but maybe over half come prepared with their load covered versus not. So it really started out as educational, it took several years to get there, and
So
just
we're
one
not talking
person
6
is
months
kinda-
or a year, it may take a
Well,
while.
these people can actually write you a ticket, and there's some teeth to it. It may
Yeah.
expedite that process to a degree, but
Yeah,
it may
yeah.
not.
So we didn't have any plan, if we were to proceed with this, we plan on keeping the landfill fee for unsecured loads. And so that's a fee charged because they're charged when they come in, and it's not necessarily a fine. But what we find is some commercial customers, it's just an employee working for them. So they don't even abide by and they're just like, well, I'm not paying this.
They'll
My
take-
employer
they'll
is."
take the fee.
And
They'll
their
take-
employers probably don't even know it's happening.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, so if we have this person, we could literally somewhat catch those people, because the fine would apply to them, to their person.
To the person,
Right.
that's what you
Like, you know,
said the
that would
last
get 'em.
time we were talking
In
about.
other words, we're gonna build a little bit of conscientious.
Right.
We've heard anecdotes where
I
people.
didn't think of that until you were just having this discussion.
Company's gonna pay for this, I'm not paying for this.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
So there's no incentive for that person
to do the right thing.
Yeah,
change
and
behavior.
it was when you talked about this, I think before, that was mentioned.
Right.
That it's to the person,
Yes.
and that's kind of where the rubber's gonna meet the road.
Right.
I would think.
And just for Michael's,
Yes.
benefit, one of the things we're talking about was, the enforcement, which I know we're still looking at.
Yeah, no,
This is-
thank you. I've got a question for the committee after you
Yeah,
finish your
and then
summary.
I think there's, I think, there's some discussion of perhaps some kind of progressive.
Progressive.
And then, is that over a period of a year, and you reset, or, how does that kind of progression work, so?
Yeah, and there's another component, which is cleanup penalty. There's a option for the court to award, maybe let's say the fine's $500. Suspend the fine and say you've got to do 20 hours of cleanup. The question for the council, one of the questions is going to be, how do you want that? Do you want to include that kind of cleanup component, or just treat it as a typical ordinance violation with a fine and you move on with the progressiveness? Because then it becomes tracking the man
Well, I was
hours.
gonna say, that's exactly right.
And
Is that the way the current ordinance is written?
Yes.
And I don't think, we're not doing that currently,
Yeah.
the judges aren't, we
Right.
don't have,
I think you have to.
we would have
oversee
to
the judge
administer it, and we
every
don't
Yeah.
have anybody to administer that.
That would, I would think
That's
that'd
the
be.
problem, what we
yeah.
get into in that case.
If a judge orders it, wouldn't it be upon the court to kind of track that? Shouldn't they have to report back to the
It would,
court?
but I think someone's gonna have to go out and, that's a great question. If we're not doing it, we don't have a track record to see how they envision enforcing it, but.
Yeah.
We probably have to assign the cleanup area and monitor that and report back that the defendant did 20 hours of community service and sign off on
Well, in saying that, do we still have any community service?
Well,
that
that's
are?
that's my wording, but the statute provides for
Yeah.
this cleanup mechanism.
I mean, it used to be, you know, people could work off time served crap, no, you know. Do we
But
not
in some cases,
enforce
we
none of
have-
that?
We have inmates that do come and work in, well,
But I
they
mean-
did, up until recently, right?
But they,
We've
they,
gotten phone calls about offering customer service as far as litter pickup. The biggest issue that we have found is what they're allowed to do is typically outside of working hours, on weekends, and you have to have somebody who's monitoring that and making sure this person shows up, leaves, and does all of that. And as it stands today, we don't have that person available to do that.
The other thing that comes up is the risk aspect.
You
of
ain't
that.
joking, it's a liability to walk up and down
Well,
the
that's
side
so
of the road.
there is.
You ain't
You
They
got
get hit by
one
cars.
person that needs to do community service.
I don't know how these people ride
Go ahead and
bicycles. That's
Do
just-
Route 5 by yourself. Here's a
Yeah.
vest. If something were, I don't know what the county's liability would be in
yeah,
that
to
situation.
liability,
If they were
yeah.
to get injured while
Yeah.
performing community service,
We'd
that
have
was
to work with,
assigned by us.
Risk management on that.
Yep. But
So-
that does come up, we've talked about that.
I have to get some kind of special policy or something, with special events, is
How
what
can
we
we
do.
enforce a state law when we can't?
Yeah, so we can't, we've got to tailor, sorry to interrupt, we've got to tailor the enforcement to the local provisions, and if it's purely a state enforcement aspect, our code enforcement officers wouldn't be, litter control officers
So
wouldn't be
they
able to do
can't,
that.
they can't run license checks, they can't run plate checks, they can't do anything, all they can do is write an ordinance ticket.
Mhm.
So we can't do anything with state law with this, is the way it's written.
That's right, because we're not authorized to enforce that.
So we wouldn't be able to keep state, or as pursuing state law, they would have to come out of it.
Well,
We'll have to come out.
the penalties and enforcement.
Well, now,
Ordinance
this,
violations.
this particular
That's
individual
what it
that's
says,
doing
aggressive
this,
schedule.
if the person is belligerent and don't want to respond, does he just take their tag number and,
No, you can't do anything with tag
yeah?
now.
Can't do anything.
So that's what I'm saying, you know, we're,
Because the tag doesn't, it belongs to the car, whoever's registered, it
Right.
doesn't necessarily belong to the person driving it.
so basically somebody can just tell them basically, I'll just
But that's
shove off.
custodial arrest, what was the discussion on that? Are we supportive of custodial arrest? In which case you could detain them.
And what if they don't pay their fines?
But they're not
That's an
carrying,
option that we could,
they're not carrying firearms or
in
handguns.
this case, then.
Well, they would have firearms, at least as proposed. But.
Trash man, get the gun.
handcuffs.
Oh
I mean,
my
that's what
goodness,
the
we're gonna get
training's
somebody
about.
killed.
They just couldn't enforce state law,
Uh-huh.
Yes.
and they couldn't pull anyone over.
Correct. Mhm.
But they could make a custodial arrest if that person were to become on it.
Mhm.
What are you arresting them for? I mean,
Well,
if
you
they're
could be-
belligerent and, I mean, is that?
Well, you could be arresting them for, they'd have to be arrested for something related to the litter control
Okay.
ordinance.
Right,
Mm.
only related to the litter control order.
Mhm.
That's kind of what, I mean, where does it elevate to that level? I mean,
And
if they're
it's-
becoming
it's-
belligerent and combative, that's not
At that
related
point,
to the
then they have to
litter,
call
that's
the sheriff,
when you
right,
call
to get
someone that
something
can
on
be
there.
that.
Yeah,
Right.
faces
But they
is
can
getting
detain the
red by
person.
that point.
Right.
Alrighty.
I personally don't like the accountability of having staff with a firearm.
No.
I'm not law enforcement. I mean, that's just me. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, well, they would have to be
The
trained.
scenario in these times. that
I mean,
we're in
if
right
he's
now,
gonna,
Well-
primarily, he's gonna be at the landfill, right? And obviously
Or
visit some of the
each one of the
recycling
centers.
centers.
Yep.
Any convenience
Yep.
centers, yeah.
Yeah.
It's much like security in a community, you know, community security guard has really, you know, we call him Officer Barney Fife. Sorry.
But he has no bullets.
But it depends
I
on
mean,
what-
they have no,
It depends. It depends on how you approach somebody. If you're, what is your goal behind putting this person in place? It's to educate and try to
Mhm.
prevent something from happening. Our goal isn't to be out here writing tickets and trying to reprimand somebody or something like that. If somebody goes to get out of hand, it's no different than what we tell our attendants. you can tell them, we only accept this amount, but if they're gonna do it, step out of the way, let them go. At the end of the day, it's, it's a collection center.
So it's sort of a added
So,
layer.
You gotta
in
figure
there.
out what your goal is behind it
Yeah.
and determine on what the value of that's gonna be.
Mhm.
The fact we talk about litter year in and year out, it doesn't get any better. If this is an opportunity to educate more and to have somebody in the, there in front of them and in the face of the public, so to speak, as long as they're approaching it correctly, you shouldn't have any issues.
Shouldn't have any.
It's all about how you approach somebody typically.
Well,
You
what
don't have
will,
that few percentage that's still there, but
Yeah, well, I mean,
what will be the consequences if they choose not to pay their fine? Or will there be?
it was written in
That would be,
I don't know, that'd be
the
similar.
judge orders that,
Part of the
so.
court
I think it's contempt, right?
Yeah, that'd be.
Yeah, that's gonna be between him and the court at that point.
Referred to law enforcement and that, yeah.
That's between him and the court at that
Is
point.
that
Once
like
it's
a
issued,
bench
if
warrant?
he has to go to
The
court.
judge ordered,
Yeah.
yeah.
They're gonna be contempt courts.
It's rough for being
And
when
we're
you
not
can
the
to
ones
get you in
going out
trouble.
there to do that. That's beyond, that goes to the next step.
I mean,
Yeah, and that would come up if they get
Right.
pulled over for something else, they
Right.
go run a check and then pops up.
how do you write a ticket, an ordinance ticket, without asking for a license or something to show that person is?
Who they are, who they say they are.
You need their license to write
Yeah.
the ticket.
Cause I'll tell them I'm Eric Record if I get a ticket.
We have to-
You're gonna be,
So we would basically have
This
to
is the
design
same-
a database that tracks those conversations with that person, because we cannot use law enforcement database to do it as a
Right.
city.
Yeah, we would
If
have
we were
to
gonna be
look at it
progressive,
ourselves.
you'd have to have some means of tracking it.
Yes.
mhm.
So that's gotta go into the thought too, is how long will it take for that to be designed or whatever it is that.
Well, see, that's why I was asking, will they be able to get their license plate number to qualify, address, so forth.
We'd have to get their license in order to write the ticket. So we have to do an animal control. Which means we have to always make contact with somebody. So when you got some,
So there is
a
always
horse that's
some
about to die at a
connection
field
there.
and you just can't ever get a hold of the owner, it becomes a,
We should be able to piggyback that database from animal control.
yeah, it's very specific to animals, but. I
But
mean,
there is a
sure, there's
database for
very
that.
simple.
This thing is getting more
Right.
like the grocery store parking lot and the big 400 that trips on the sidewalk and it sues the store. That's what-
well, I'm just gonna look at this in my head. Like you said, it's education,
With an extra layer, is it?
it's an extra layer, and right now it's so bad that anything's better than nothing
Right.
at this point.
And I think,
I mean, it is horrible. The roads in my area are just disgusting. I'm thinking about getting a bag and going out there with my high heels on.
not the high.
Well, I'm just, I'm like, look, see what I'm doing, you crazy people?
You better
That-
get you a stick with a nail in the end of it.
But it's just, it's gotta be better than what it is. And,
Well, I think if you look at it, do you see a lot of litter going to the landfill, into the convenience centers? I think the answer is yes, because a lot of people show up and they don't secure their loads. So it would address some of it.
yeah,
It's not gonna address 100%.
yeah, I know,
Well, I
but,
mean, the simple fact of the matter is now in this quote modern times, we just produce way too much damn garbage. That's how it is. I mean, it never ends. Back years ago, back when people canned and everything else, you didn't have near this garbage. I mean,
Well, we didn't have Amazon either.
no, shoot,
It's all
no.
plastic film, right?
And Amazon, it ain't enough to put something in the box. They got about 1,000 other things stuffed in there.
All right, so if we don't have anything else to add to the fire,
So I think on the ordinance, in terms of what we discussed, the penalties and enforcement,
Yeah.
they could still report this out and it could go to council.
Yes, report that out. I'm hearing that the current provision of the litter component of the penalties probably should be taken out, because we're not monitoring that, or leave it in at
Yeah.
the discretion of the court?
Well, or it's still at the discretion of the court, maybe not remove it, because there's still, yeah.
I think you leave it because it
Yeah.
still allows law enforcement officers to write tickets and
With
we
the
are
threat.
actually getting
Right.
support from the code enforcement officer now. He's, you know, who is doing things. I just think that the ordinance would either supersede it or the litter enforcement officer would be able to write it based on the ordinance, fines or not, so.
Yeah, and you also have that nuisance component, that could be either one.
So yes, to answer your question, Mike, thank you.
So, is anybody else?
I guess would you recommend the proposed changes favorably?
If you recommend, then maybe we could go to council for first reading, right, with your modifications.
Yeah, yes.
Where's the discussion of the actual employee fall into this? I mean, we
Well,
just
funding
change
the
the
position.
ordinance right now, but without having the person to actually do it? I mean, is that the first step? And that's a conversation at a later date?
Talking about adding an employee?
Yes,
To this?
to actually enforce this new ordinance.
Is your employee not, excuse me for interrupting, is the employee not in the budget proposal? No, okay.
That's a whole different discussion.
Yeah, yeah.
You can just walk down that landfill and tell Jerry, "All right, Jerry, I got a new position for you." Bring him on up there and say, "Your job title's changed."
But we'll leave that to you all to make the pitch about the employee,
Okay.
and we'll see where that goes, cause
Yeah, I think it's really contingent upon, do we wanna proceed with the ordinance, right? And then I would think we would have the employee back that up.
I mean, obviously, this,
But,
the ability to do the progressive, fine, put some teeth into what we're trying to accomplish. And that's raising that awareness to get people to do the right thing, cause we don't want the money.
yeah, I don't think this is gonna generate enough money to pay for the
No,
position.
no, we don't want the
Right?
money. Well, we'll see, do we need to do anything, besides to update? Do we need to approve this ordinance as written versus any kind of changes to come, or how do we get this back?
I think
to
you can
council?
report it out favorably with proposed changes and making the penalty provision consistent with state law and local and state law. The statute allows for enforcement at both levels, and we can only enforce the local jurisdiction. So we just have to reconcile the penalty provision to make sure it's where it needs to be for our litter control officers. So we can recommend it favorably with penalty provision to be made consistent with local enforcement.
So we're not gonna do anything with this today?
I believe you could. I mean, I think that,
So what do we need?
So I think they would need to vote, right?
yeah, to vote to recommend the proposed changes.
To the ordinance and,
And with the condition that the penalty provision would be made consistent with our local enforcement efforts.
All right, so I need a motion on that.
Motion to approve.
With the changes,
Yeah, ordinance of changes.
All right, so I have a motion to approve the recommended proposed changes with the penalty provisions to be consistent with local enforcement.
yes.
and I'll second.
Well, Tommy made it.
Well, Tommy made the motion.
Motion, and you say.
Second.
All right. So all in favor on that motion?
Aye.
Aye. So we have it, and we'll move it to the full council. So we do have to mark out what the state's doing in this ordinance, right? That's what we're gonna do, just
We're gonna, yes, we're gonna at least clarify it so that.
because we can't enforce the state.
Yeah, that's right, so we're just gonna make it sure it's solely local centered penalties.
Okay. And this is just a recommendation to the full council, and if it gets to full council and they don't support it, then it's out anyway.
Right, it
So,
would go through 3 readings and a
Yeah.
public hearing like any other ordinance.
Yes.
all right. Barring any other agenda items, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll
All in
second.
favor?
Aye.
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 We are adjourned.